Hello and welcome to WorldCanvass from International Programs at the University of Iowa. I'm Joan Kerr and we're coming to you from Film Scene in downtown Iowa City. This is part 2 of our 3-part series on energy cultures and the age of the Anthropocene. I'd like to remind you that you're invited to attend these live programs at Film Scene if you have the time and you're in the Iowa City area, or you can catch them later on UI TV, YouTube, iTunes, and the International Programs website. And you can learn more about Film Scene at icfilmscene.org. In this segment, we're going to look at environment as a right. And my guests in this segment are Nicholas Brown, visiting assistant professor in the University of Iowa Department of American Studies. Thank you for being here, Nick.
Thanks.
And next to him is Mike Carberry, who's a Johnson County supervisor. Thanks for being here, Mike.
You're welcome.
And at the far end, we have University of Iowa student Andrew Hirst. He's also on the Sustainability Advisory Committee. And thank you very much for being here and sharing your afternoon with us. Appreciate it. So, Nick, I'd like to start with you first. You heard the first portion of our program on energy cultures in the age of the Anthropocene. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how energy needs, energy use, energy availability affects societies large and small.
Many ways, of course. I think for me, when thinking about the Anthropocene, thinking about humans as a geologic force, I immediately go to the question about human difference. And I think the Anthropocene is a challenge and an opportunity to really think differently about human difference, about race, about class, about gender, and about the differential impacts in the context of climate change, in the context of energy use, extraction, and so forth. So I think it presents a opportunity and a challenge to reimagine society, but it also requires that we really foreground, for me, questions about social justice, questions about environmental justice in relation to climate change, and I think the environmental justice movement, a social movement that emerged in the early 1980s, is a really important precedent for us as we confront crisis of changing climates today.
So help us understand that concept. What is the concept of environmental justice? What is that movement?
The environmental justice movement, I think on the most fundamental level, is about the uneven distribution of climate or environmental burdens and benefits. So we can think in terms of landfills, for example. Where are landfills sited, in what communities? Often, this has been the case, they're cited in communities that lack political power. They're cited in communities with primarily low-income residents, cited in communities of color. Not in, you can look at Chicago, for example, and think about where coal-fired power plants are located. They're not on the north side of the city. They're predominantly on the south side of the city, the lower income part of Chicago. So environmental justice is fundamentally a struggle to address questions about participation in political processes, to ensure a fair distribution of burdens and also benefits. So I think it's important to recognize that environmental justice is not simply a fight against a landfill, against an industrial facility, but also the assertion of a right to a healthy environment, the struggle for a different way of living on this planet and coexisting with other people and other critters.
So I can imagine that you mentioned the case of Chicago. You mentioned some established plants that are already there. But going forward, I guess the fight becomes one with city councils or with development boards or whatever to try to, is that where the environmental justice movement stands up and says we need to consider this community that may be a poorer community than, Winnetka, but I mean, is this where you take that fight? Does it go to development boards, urban planning groups?
It does. I think the fight occurs simultaneously on multiple levels. So it is very much a fight against a specific facility, against a specific location. and a fight that occurs within the political and legal system, but it's also, I think, simultaneously a fight that occurs outside that system, and at the same time that it is advocating for a different sort of short-term solution. It's advocating for a fundamental transformation of the way in which we live together, the way in which we produce and consume energy. I think the the best examples of struggles for environmental justice are ones that operate on multiple levels, as opposed to just being about a particular facility, moving that somewhere else. Obviously, we generate trash. It needs to go somewhere. So the expression NIMBY or NIMBYism, not in my backyard, I think is an example of a more sort of narrow understanding of environmental justice.
So could you talk to us a little bit about some of the issues Indigenous peoples have had regarding access to energy, and then also some of these kinds of fights we've just been discussing?
Sure. I think a really great example of environmental justice is a proposed mine in northern Wisconsin in the Pinocchio Hills. This is a mine that was proposed back in 2011, an open pit iron ore mine that is directly upstream from the Bad River Indian Reservation, just a few dozen miles from Lake Superior. And this is a mine that was proposed with zero consultation. The tribe was not asked. The tribe has been vehement in their opposition to this mine and have stated very matter-of-factly that they believe it would result in their genocide, their death, having this massive, it would be one of the largest open pit mines in the world, directly upstream from the tribe. And interestingly, just last week, just a few days ago, the Klein Group, GTAC, the corporation that proposed this mine, is withdrawing, given the sort of resistance that they have faced among Indigenous peoples in Wisconsin and non-Indigenous peoples as well. So it's an example, too, of some really important coalition building or alliances that have formed among Native people and non-Native peoples. But I think more generally, it's Indigenous peoples, along with other groups, are often on the front lines of the climate crisis, often feel the effects and have contributed little to the causes. And pretty much anywhere you look, you can find examples of this. The Keystone, struggle over the Keystone pipeline right now. Other pipelines related to the tar sands in Alberta are a really good example of Indigenous communities rising up and saying, no, we don't want this. We don't want this here. We don't want this flowing through our land, through our traditional territories.
So when it comes to a community like Iowa City, how do we approach our own community, governments, activist groups in our own areas, corporate groups in our own areas, to get them to consider some of the questions that we've been talking about here, climate justice, environmental justice, as we move forward with, progress?
I think I have a particular interest in thinking about climate change within a colonial context, so trying to understand how colonialism, as both a historic event and an ongoing process, is contributing to climate change. I was struck this past fall, Iowa City celebrated its 175th anniversary. That discussions about the city, its history, included no sort of mention of the people who were here before, specifically the Meskwaki villages that were located right here in what is now Iowa City. And so I believe there is a real need to sort of come to terms with the history of colonization and its ongoing forms, and think about the role that plays, driving, as being one of a handful of drivers of climate change. So I think building bridges between groups here in Iowa City, such as Iowa City Climate Advocates and the Coalition for Racial Justice. Issues that ostensibly on the surface appear unrelated. I think there are some, when we start thinking about root causes of a climate crisis, climate change, there are some important intersections that can be bridged. And again, I think that's one of the sort of challenges and invitations, opportunities that the Anthropocene presents to us. So,
Yeah, good. Well, thank you. Well, that leads us very naturally into a conversation with Mike Carberry. Mike's a longtime advocate for environmental causes, and he's worked for many years as a volunteer and as a professional trying to advance discussion of climate change. And he ran for the office of Johnson County Supervisor in 2014 on a platform promoting sustainable growth and protection of Iowa's agricultural land from residential development. Mike won that election. He's now a member of the Johnson County Board of Supervisors. And so, Mike, you can either pick up directly on what Nick has just said here or give us a little bit of background into how you got into this environmental fight many years ago in your own life.
Well, I got into it through politics, and I was working on Al Gore's campaign for president in the late 90s, and when you work on a political campaign, you read their book. Every candidate has a book. I read his book, and it was called Earth in the Balance, and it changed my life. I had never heard of global warming. We didn't even call it climate change then, but I realized that this was going to be the defining issue of our generations. Future generations will look at us and say, you knew and you didn't do anything, or thank God that you did. And so I started volunteering with the Sierra Club and other groups. And in 2005, I put out my own shingle, and I have a company called Green State Solutions where I work on climate change solutions. So I've worked on fighting new coal plants, on new nuclear power plants. I've sat on the board of the Iowa Wind Energy Association for 10 years. I was the lobbyist for Tim Dwight, who's in the solar business for a couple years. And so I've always worked on climate change solutions. I've worked on things, what I would consider false climate change solutions, like nuclear power, fighting that. I'm not a big advocate of biomass because burning is burning, and we need to quit burning stuff. So when I saw that the subject here was environmental, the right to environment, I said, what does that mean? And to me, that goes back to common law. The right of all people to clean air, to clean water, and to clean land. We all have that. And you start thinking about what is sustainability. Well, sustainability is living more simply so others can simply live type of thing, that we should have the lightest footprint that we can in order for future generations to exist and to thrive. And he was talking about, Nick, about Native American lands and First Nation. And you know, most of our uranium is mined in either the Southwest on Native American lands or in the Dakotas on Native American lands. And that, it just devastates them. And so I picked up something from the Iroquois a number of years ago, and it's called Seventh Generation. And I misinterpreted it at first, and some people think that, oh, seventh generation, we need to base our decisions on 7 generations into the future. And that's what I thought. I said, well, that sounds good. You know, 7 generations is a long time, but then someone says, no, Mike, you've got that wrong. What the 7th generation is, you're the middle generation. You need to base your decisions on what your parents, your grandparents, and your great-grandparents would think of that decision, and then also how it affects your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren. And so if you base these, and Ty earlier was talking about history, you know, we've been burning coal and burning fossil fuels for almost a couple hundred years now, since the Industrial Revolution. They didn't know it at the time. We know it, you know, and we know it now. And it's time that we really start to face up to that because of what it will do to our future generations. And what I see being a political activist or a lobbyist for the last 10 years, I know how strong the political process is. And sometimes I have great hope, and other times I'm very depressed because we do live in the greatest nation that money can buy, the political system. And when you are up against the Koch brothers and the candidates that they fund, and the Koch brothers, where did their money come from? Came from the fossil fuel industries. And they're willing to spend almost $1 billion on the next presidential election. Well, they represent the forces of the status quo. They've been making so much money on burning fossil fuels that they don't want things to change. So our job is to either change our political system or to generate enough people and interest to throw the people that want the status quo out of office and get the people that want a clean energy future, get them into office. So that's kind of what I've worked on for 10 years. I hope to bring that ethic not only in energy, but in other forms of environmental sustainability to the county level, because all politics are local.
And you work very heavily on wind energy and on solar energy. Tell us something about the temperament in Iowa government, Iowa business. What do you think the landscape looks like now?
Well, large wind has been great, been very bipartisan issue in the state of Iowa. We have about 8,000 jobs in the state of Iowa in the wind industry. That's been great for the state of Iowa. Both Republicans and Democrats have supported that. The wind industry also, like a lot of renewable energies, they don't exist, but they're helped with tax credits. There's a production tax credit that's a national tax credit that's expired currently. And so the wind industry has gone through waves of peak and boom and bust. And right now it's on a national level, it's going on the bust side because of the direction and the influence of the fossil fuel industry. Remember that they're not in the business of producing energy, they're in the business of producing profits. So wind energy, large wind energy is great in Iowa, and it has been. What we're fighting right now is transmission. For us to really reach the goals that we need to on climate change, in areas that can produce renewable energy, we need to overproduce. Iowa can produce so much more wind than we already are, but then we need to export that wind to load centers, like to Chicago, the Twin Cities, and places beyond. So we need more transmission. So that's a big fight with wind energy right now. Solar is doing very well in the state of Iowa, especially small solar, distributed solar. I'd like to see a solar array on every southern facing roof in Johnson County and the state of Iowa. And that's distributed generation. And we have a right to that. People have the right to produce their own energy and get paid for that. That's another right that we didn't mention. But small wind as well. Small wind goes very well with small solar. They fit like a hand and a glove together. They mesh well. Wind blows predominantly at night and during the winter months, where the sun obviously doesn't shine at night, and it's strongest during the summer months. So when you put a combination system of a small wind turbine and small solar panels, they blend very well together. And we would hope to see more of that, especially in the rural areas of Iowa, which is where you want to site a wind turbine. You don't want to put them in the city. You know, they don't work well.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, so we've been talking about future generations, right? You're one of the younger people on this program panel tonight, and you're part of that future generation. You're an undergrad now, and you're very involved in sustainability, environmental causes, and so on. Why is that a passion you've taken up in your life?
Because sustainability to me means a moral obligation, and there's a moral imperative that comes with it. It goes so far beyond just development, and it goes so far beyond just planting the garden. It is really a call to action, to arms, to assert ourselves as the people that we want to be, and to live a better and more decent life, and to extend those virtues and those values so far beyond ourselves. And so when people say sustainability, it's just not a hobby, it's just not something you study, but it's everything, all-encompassing future of our society and of our identities as well.
Yeah, so what do you do within the Office of Sustainability?
Outreach and engagement. I have the fine fortune of working with some of the greatest student leaders ever. They concern themselves with both the environment, with volunteers, with activism, with advocacy around some of the probably just the most terrifying issues that we have to face and that we're going to face as this generation comes up with this. And I'm always impressed, and I'm always just taken aback by their engagement and the sacrifices that they make, knowing that the future may actually be really unclear for them. And so outreach and engagement is what I'm involved in. I get to work out at the student garden to do best organic practices out there, get to work with the Environmental Coalition to raise awareness and advocacy. Next week we get to do a climate workshop, where we get to take, carbon footprint workshop, where we get to take students from classes and just really trying to educate them about what a carbon footprint is and what are some of the low-hanging barriers that you can really change in your life just to add that drop to the bucket. I get to work with bike friends to advocate for cycling, recreational, but leisure, and then also the social justice features of cycling, as well as many other student organizations.
Do you find that students are very, very interested in this range of issues that you're talking about? It's not a fringe thing that's sort of like the first time they've ever heard it, right?
No, not anymore. And that's so endearing and so great, especially even in the majors that I am with environmental policy and planning, that these people are dedicated to both studying these issues, but then hopefully forwarding their education and taking it out of the ivory tower and bringing it to the world, because this is where it starts. This isn't an academic discussion any longer. It's for everybody because it impacts such a large and broad audience.
Mm-hmm. And what's your study area?
Political science and environmental policy.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, very good, very good. So you want to go into policy work eventually, or?
That's a good question. I don't necessarily know what I want to be doing, but I know I want to be trying incredibly hard each and every day.
Can't do it for the money.
One of my professors actually said that very same sentiment, is that there's nothing worth doing in this life that you're actually going to make a lot of money on, and that's just one of those things that has stuck with me, that money is not going to be an important feature of my life, and hopefully it's not an important feature of everybody's life. To rip off Citizen Kane's line, it's not hard to make a lot of money if all you want to do is to make a lot of money, and there's so much more important to that.
Yeah. Right. Well, one of the things you told me in a communication we had before the program was that you wanted to concentrate on the word future, and what is sustainability in the context of time?
Most definitely. And Mike talked about that with his seventh generations, and that the promise of sustainability, at least to us and at least around to my age group and then people younger than me, was not sacrificing the well-being of the individuals alive today and sacrificing the resources of those in the future. Well, this is the future. How far we can kick this can down the road, I don't think it can go any farther. This is the generation that we are experiencing climate change. The residency time of CO2 and other greenhouse gases is around 100 years, the different ones, methane being around 25 to 50 years, water vapor being just around 10. But these are things that have such far-reaching consequences that go so far beyond, and that we're already locked into this, that there's little, if anything, we can do to address some of these atmospheric issues, and that we're just going to have to adapt or try to mitigate it or simply suffer by it. And so the idea of sustainability as a promise is more and more seeming like a farce to me, that now it's not an option of trying to become more sustainable, but it's an option of trying to adapt to this change that's already in process and already in place. And so sustainability in a future context, well, this is the future, this is our experience, and this is our world right now.
When we were talking before the program, we had discussed both talking about environment as a right and energy as a right. And you've addressed this a little bit in your comments too, that not everybody has equal access to energy. Not everybody creates as much damage, if we can call it that, to the environment as others. How do we make that case? Whom do we talk to in order to, you know, in the first segment, multiple billions of people were mentioned as being without access to electricity, right? And then there are some of us here who have more than we could ever possibly use. And this kind of, I'm sure there are always inequities in some way when you look at the entire world and what we all have and don't have. And yet, if there were 2 or 3 principal pleas you could make to government or to the UN, what would you ask for? What kind of change do we need now in order for some kind of greater equity with both the environment and energy access?
I'll start with that. The first thing we need to do, I think, is to change our political process and give the democracy back to the people. We need to overturn Citizens United, and that money is not speech, and people and corporations are not people. We need to then elect the best leaders. It's got to be about ideas and leadership, and not about who has the most money from the Koch brothers that gets elected. So if we can return democracy to the way it's supposed to be, then maybe we have a fighting chance. If we don't, then our goose may already be cooked.
I think, just to echo that, I think there's a difference between asking for something and demanding it or taking it. And I draw inspiration from the many struggles, which in some cases are united, other cases sort of discrete. Particularly, indigenous struggles to defend the land. In defending the land, not only land sort of as a physical or material thing, but also defending different ways of relating to the land. Thinking about land as Glenn Coulthard, a young Dene scholar, has written about land as a system of reciprocal relations and obligations, and I think that's a really sort of important shift away from thinking about land simply as commodity or property resource to thinking about, and also one that breaks down the distinction between humans and nature. They're enmeshed, as Barbara was talking about, and so the sort of wisdom that has been cultivated over millennia, in many cases by indigenous peoples, I think offers some really important insights and guidance in this present moment, and figuring out, often with one thing I've found with the Anthropocene is that it does tend to have sort of a forward-looking orientation. It's about imagining the next 10,000 years, less about understanding the previous 10,000. I think the forms of ecological knowledge that have been cultivated over hundreds, if not thousands of years, something that we really need to think about in looking both forward and backward, and figuring out ways in which that knowledge, those sort of other ways of living, relating to others, might transform our lives today.
Is there anything you'd want to add, Andrew?
I guess I'm just going to shoot for low-hanging fruit and just please don't deny it.
Yeah.
When you deny it, you deny the struggle that we all face and that we need to face head on. And so by denying it, you're just not looking ignorant. You're not looking stupid. You're just being offensive. You're denying the struggle of all future generations in tackling this issue and having to adapt to this. It's something that no other previous generation has yet had to do.
Wow, well, thank you so much, Andrew Hirst and Mike Carberry and Nick Brown. Did you want to say something else? No, and Nick Brown. And yeah. No, thank you so much. What an interesting conversation, and thank you all for being here to listen to part 2 in this 3-part series. Stick with us for the next one, when we'll be looking at some art, literature, some interpretive scholarship related to the environment, to the Anthropocene and energy, and what we've done with it, what we've done to ourselves with it. So stay with us for that, please. WorldCanvass programming is available on YouTube, iTunes, UITV, and the International Programs website, which is international.uiowa.edu. And you can check out Film Scene at icfilmscene.org. I'm Joan Kerr. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.